We tend to think of history as just what happened, right? A fixed set of facts set in stone. But it's not that simple. History is really a story we tell about what happened, and believe me, those stories can be incredibly wrong. Today, we're going to dive into a groundbreaking book by David Hackett Fischer called Historians' Fallacies. Think of it as a field guide for spotting the logical traps that mess with our understanding of the past.
Wow, what a quote, right? Nietzsche absolutely nails the central problem here, thinking backward. It's such a perfect phrase. I mean, when we look at the past, we have a superpower that no one at the time had. We know how the story ends. We know who won the war. We know who lost the election. So it's almost impossible not to arrange all the facts as if they were leading inevitably to that conclusion. And that, right there, is one of the biggest and most dangerous traps. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to unpack this whole problem of thinking backward. Then we'll get into why this isn't just some academic debate, why bad history actually matters in the real world. We'll look at Fischer's incredibly ambitious solution, and then we'll get our hands dirty and learn to spot some of the most common fallacies. Finally, we'll see how this whole thing can make us all sharper thinkers.
Okay, let's jump right in. The very first thing we have to do is challenge this idea that history is just a simple collection of facts. It feels solid, doesn't it? Like it's all just sitting there in a book. But the reality is way more complicated.
See, every single piece of history you've ever read is a construction. A historian has to choose which facts to put in, which to leave out, and how to weave them into a coherent story. And it's in that process of storytelling that all these little logical errors, what Fischer calls fallacies, can creep in and completely distort the picture of what really happened. So you might be thinking, okay, a few dusty logical errors, who cares? Well, it turns out we all should care a lot. Because these mistakes aren't just confined to textbooks, they have real and sometimes dangerous consequences.
I bet you've heard this one, that the Italian dictator Mussolini made the trains run on time. It's a catchy little phrase, isn't it? It suggests that, hey, maybe authoritarianism has its perks. But the thing is, it's basically a myth, propaganda that took on a life of its own. It's a perfect example of how a simple, appealing, but totally false story can become accepted as historical fact.
And this is where it gets really serious. Bad history messes with our understanding of the world today. It keeps harmful myths and ugly stereotypes alive, and worst of all, it can be used to justify terrible decisions in the present. That last quote from Fischer, man, is chilling. He warns that this kind of thinking can make whole nations bitter, arrogant, insufferable, and vainglorious. The stakes are incredibly high.
So Fischer says we often fall into one of two major traps. On one side, you have antiquarianism. This is treating the past like a dusty antique shop, just collecting a bunch of dead facts without ever asking what they mean or why they matter to us. On the other side, you have presentism. This is where we judge people in the past by our own modern standards, as if they should have known better. Both, Fischer says, are dead ends.
So, with all these problems, what's the solution? Well, this is where our guy, David Hackett Fischer, enters the picture. He's a brilliant historian, but he's also what you'd call a methodologist. He studies how we do history, and he noticed something huge was missing. History didn't have a formal system of logic. Fischer's goal was nothing short of monumental. He set out to create a critique of historical reason. He realized that good historians used a kind of logic all the time, but it was intuitive, it was unspoken, what he called a tacit logic. His mission was to drag that hidden logic out into the open and turn it into a rigorous, conscious framework that anyone could use.
And this is the absolute key to his whole project. Fischer wasn't just listing mistakes. He was making a powerful case that history, when it's done right, is a sophisticated problem-solving discipline, every bit as rigorous as a science. His book is the toolbox that proves it.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we actually spot these fallacies out in the wild? Fischer's book is like an encyclopedia of bad arguments. He catalogs over 100 of them. We're not going through all of those, don't worry. But let's look at 3 of the most common ones you will see everywhere.
First up, a classic. Post hoc, propter hoc. It's a fancy Latin way of saying, after this, therefore because of this. Our brains are wired to do this. We see one thing happen, then another thing happens, and we instantly assume the first thing caused the second. But as we all know, correlation is not causation. This is maybe the most common logical error out there. Fischer tells this incredible, tragic story to illustrate the point. A passenger on the sinking ocean liner, the Andrea Doria, flicked a light switch in her cabin. At that exact same second, the ship shuddered from a massive impact. And in her panic, her brain made a connection. She believed she had just pulled the ship's emergency brake. It's an absurd but powerful example of how easily our minds invent cause and effect.
All right, here's another one you've definitely seen, probably online. The fallacy of semantical questions. This is when a debate completely goes off the rails. People stop arguing about what actually happened and instead get bogged down in a fight over the definition of a word. The actual substance gets totally lost.
And Fischer's analogy for this is just perfect. He says these arguments are like two people fighting over a zebra. One screams, "It's a white animal with black stripes." The other screams back, "No, it's a black animal with white stripes." Who cares? You're both missing the point, which is to actually understand the zebra. It's brilliant.
And our third example is the fallacy of the lonely fact. This one is huge. It's when someone takes one tiny piece of evidence, a single quote, a single person, one weird event, and they blow it up to make a sweeping conclusion about an entire group or an entire historical era. It's like trying to build a skyscraper on top of a single wobbly brick.
Fischer uses a fantastic example from American history. For a long time, our whole understanding of the early Federalist Party was pretty much based on just two guys, Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. The problem? Both of them were kind of oddballs, eccentrics, not really representative of the whole group. So to define an entire political movement by its two weirdest members, well, that's a classic lonely fact fallacy.
So let's bring this all home. Because learning to spot these fallacies isn't just about being a history nerd. This isn't just an academic exercise. It's about something much bigger.
Look, the real goal here isn't to equip you to win arguments on the internet. It's to help you develop what Fischer calls a healthy skepticism. It's about giving you the tools to appreciate just how difficult and how rigorous the discipline of history really is. And these tools don't just work on the past. They help you think more critically about everything you see and hear today.
And that really leaves us with a challenge, doesn't it? So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Which historical truth do you just take for granted? What are the simple stories, the convenient myths, the lonely facts that shape your own view of the world? Because once you start learning to spot the fallacies in how we think about the past, you become so much better equipped to navigate the complexities of the present.